I found that on average, people lose between 3 to 7% of an estate plan's value due to probate. And for example, an estate plan might cost or might be valued at about 500,000. So the cost could range anywhere from 15,000 to 35,000. Have you seen greater numbers, or is that what do you think about just some of that data?
I don't know what on a percentage rate some of them, but probably one of the worst was, again, Prince, who, to my knowledge, had no children. But the state ended up with his home, made it into a tourist stop because he was a singer and from Minnesota. But right there, and I don't know if his parents were still alive, but his siblings and or parents at the time, look at the estate they missed out on from their son or sibling just because there was no will, and the state said, oh, wow, looky here. So I don't know any specifics behind it. I just happen to know it's a tourist spot now.
Yeah, that's awful. That is absolutely awful. We can pivot to the other portion, which is just the asset protection, as being one of the benefits of an irrevocable trust. How do you benefit from that from an asset protection perspective?
Again, the irrevocable trust is such a wonderful instrument to work in and through, because I'm going to mention like revocable. Now, revocable can also have some of the probate protections, but it has zero asset protection. So again, that follows you. So when you pass, that passes also. But on the irrevocable side, there is no attachment to you. So when you pass, it keeps on living. It has a lifespan of, from the time it was created, it's a 45-year term. Now, asset protection, once it's in there, it's never been or is no longer yours. So when you pass, it's all protected in there because you don't own it. The trust owns it. If something in this life happens to you that you are liable for some reason, somebody comes after you for some type of lawsuit, some kind of collector, these assets are not attainable. I like to compare it to bubbles. Each trust is like a bubble, and everything that is placed in that bubble is protected from its environment around it. But if something were to happen inside that bubble, something were to blow up, it's contained inside that bubble. So it's kind of like, you don't want all your eggs in one basket, just with even your life. I mean, when we acquire assets and cars and houses and all these things, we are never taught in school that we should diversify and place these things outside of us, outside of our name. So if these items are placed within trusts, and I have different trusts for different things, well then the thing that's inside this bubble can't affect the thing that's inside the bubble over here, because that's protecting from, has a bubble around it as well. So again, if there's a liability issue, it's protected from that, or it protects it, the others from it.
Okay. Well, I want to pivot a little bit. Okay. Maybe we won't spend eight. We'll come back to that one. Next question. Very interesting question. What are some benefits of a non-statutory trust compared to a statutory trust? And then what does that even mean?
What is the benefits? The benefits are unmeasurable almost. The difference between a statute and a non-statute trust is that let me start with statute. When a trust is written with statutes placed in, let's say an attorney writes it up, and they have to write it in the sense that it brings all these other players into the contract. So the contract is no longer just between two parties. Now it's between a host of parties. And part of that host is they're inviting the state in and all the state's regulations and requirements and statutes. And it's also bringing in the Fed and all of its statutes and everything and the requirements that it has that it wants to impose upon this contract. And the third is the IRS. They're bringing them in and all of the statutes and codes that they have, along with the original players. So that's statutory. Non-statutory is the contract is written between the two players. And so with that said, none of what I just explained is brought into the contract. So the state isn't brought into the contract, the federal isn't brought in, IRS isn't brought in, the neighbor across the street, and because all these players get brought in. It's very clean, it's simple, and healthy. So it's a very, very unique and beautiful way to work. It's way, I like to, a trust, the original trust was built by our Heavenly Creator, and He explains it very simply to us in Genesis. So a non-statutory, I like to explain it that, again, it's built very simply so that it keeps you freer without all these other burdens that are brought into the contract.
Wow. I think that's as simple as it can get. I mean, as far as any questions that might stem from that, that makes sense and that's really clear. Essentially, if I can recap that, if you're operating in a non-statutory agreement, the agreement is between you and the other party or parties alone and no one else that is uninvited. But if it is statutory, essentially you are inviting people indirectly to be a part of that agreement because of the statutes that are written in maybe a local government or country or state. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, and when you signed up, you acknowledged they were there and that they were part of the contract and you're okay with it. Yeah, because you're the one that's supposed to have read through it, understood it, and now you're okay with all those players coming to the table.